I'm so sorry that I'm not able to be with you today, but I am grateful for the opportunity of sharing for a moment with you on something that is very close to my heart, the issue of how disabled people are treated in the church and our mission to, with and alongside men and women and children who have disabilities. If disabled people were lumped together as one people group or one ethnos, then they would be the most excluded people group in the world. They would be the poorest people group in the world. They would be the least employed people group in the world. And perhaps to the church's shame, they would be the least evangelized people group in the world as well. 2,000 years after the life, birth, and example of Jesus Christ, I think that is a disgrace. And we are called somehow to understand that disabled people, men, women, boys and girls, whatever that disability might be, are not an obligation. They're not an infringement on our time. They're not people that we have to put up with. They are people, first and foremost, people made in the image of God. And they don't ask us to show them dignity. They don't request gently or politely that we show them the respect. They demand it. Inclusion and its nature and its implications lie at the heart of what it means to be a follower of Jesus and a member of his church. Let me tell you a story about a couple who deeply impacted me, and it's a true story. It's the story of Andy and Joy and Hope. Andy and Joy were a couple that I pastored in Bournemouth for many years, and they had a little girl whose name was Hope. A few months after Hope was born, she was diagnosed as having something called Cornelia de Lange syndrome, which means that she will never speak or see or hear, that her behaviour would be quite aggressive, and that her intellectual and mental capacity would remain very infantised. When I went to talk to Andy and Joy about Hope and how we could support her and the family, I remember walking into the room and Joy lifted up this little girl and handed her to me. She didn't say, "This is my disabled daughter." She didn't say, "This is my daughter who has something wrong with her." She handed she handed me her daughter, and she said, "She's got her father's eyes." You see, in Joy's eyes, Hope was first and foremost her daughter. And that's important for us to remember as we think about how we deal with, handle, welcome, include, and empower people who live with disabilities in their families. They're not first and foremost people that have something wrong with them. They are sons and daughters of the living God. They are made in the image of God. They don't ask for respect, as I said a moment or two ago. They demand it. You see, for me, inclusion is not something that we can choose or not choose. It's an issue of gospel importance. To welcome people is a gospel imperative. To include people is a gospel imperative. What do I mean by that? Do I mean, therefore, that it doesn't matter what's happened to them or the choices that they make? Yes, in one way, I do mean that. But in another, I mean to include is to create pathways or avenues for people to hear and understand to the best of their ability the good news of who Jesus Christ is and enable them to make a response to that. For a deaf community, that means that we have to work with how we use BSL, how we communicate and empower and enable a conversation and a dialogue and a space for them to minister. For people who live with visual impairment, we have to work out how we do that. For those that live with limited mobility, or those on the autistic spectrum, or any one of a range of other disabilities, we have a responsibility as Christians, I have a responsibility as a pastor, to recognise that this is an issue of gospel importance. How do I enable people as much as they can to hear and respond to the good news of Jesus Christ? I don't mean just how do I work out ways of being nice, or how do I work out ways of being loving? But it's pretty clear to me that if somebody can't even get into our building, they're not going to be able to hear and share in what it means to be part of the community of faith. But the issue of inclusion for disabled people is not about ramps and loos. It's about heart and attitude. It's about a change of mindset that sees people not as objects of charity, but as equals, as men and women, boys and girls, who are equal to me in God's standing. That's why the image of God idea is so very important to me. A few years ago, was involved in a range of roadshows that enabled people to understand the implications and the requirements of the Disability Discrimination Act. And in 90% of the many thousands of people that I spoke to, at the end of the presentation, a conversation went something like this. So what do I have to do to get away with this? What a ridiculous question. What a terrible place to start. Disability and inclusion is not a thing that we say, well, what do I have to do to get away with it? We should be leading the way. Another conversation that often took place for me was when leaders or church wardens or secretaries or treasurers or building development people for local churches said something like, we haven't had very long to work out what to do about access and disability and discrimination and sorting all of that out. My response was always the same. You've had 2,000 years. We shouldn't be following an agenda of inclusion because we want to work out how to comply with the law. Compliance is not the issue. The issue is gospel. The issue is being people who recognize that Jesus asked us to reach out to other people. This issue of inclusion and working with, alongside, and for disabled people is an issue of incarnation. It is what Christ did for us. He came to us. He limited his capacities and his abilities in order to reach us. He was constrained, if you like. He was disabled so that he could walk with us and we could understand him. How do we become incarnational to communities or to men and women who live with disability? How do we create services or training programs? How do we make our buildings accessible? But far more importantly, how do we make our hearts accessible? How do we make the gospel accessible to people who have been disabled from hearing it, seeing it, experiencing it, or being part of a gospel community? That disability might be to do with their intellectual or mental capacity. It might be to do with their physical capacity. It might be to do with their emotional spectrum. It might be to do with one of any number of things. It strikes me that our responsibility is not simply to try and be compliant. It is to be incarnational, gospel, good news orientated people that help others to see that Christ loves them as much as he loves us and is willing and able to transform them as much as he is willing and able to transform us. But thirdly, for me, this is also an issue of empowerment and mission. About a quarter of people in the United Kingdom will, at one stage or another, live with mental illness. They'll either be caring for somebody with it or they'll be living with it themselves. From a range that goes from mild forms of mental illness to severe and lasting forms of mental illness. This is also a mission opportunity for us. I get worried sometimes that we treat disabled people as the objects of our charity, instead of men and women who also need to hear and see the gospel and experience the good news of Christ. Think of what would happen if you built a relationship with the Autistic Society in your community, if you were working with the mental health team, if you were having a conversation with people in your community that said, look, we can run a service with accessible aspects of it so that people who feel disabled and disempowered can become part of this community. Think of the isolation that would break, the loneliness that would break in many people's lives. And then multiply that by whatever number of people are in their family. This is a mission opportunity. Putting a sign of an occluded ear or an occluded eye on the door of your church is not simply about being politically correct. It's about saying people who live with disability are welcome here. And we want to demonstrate and show them that they are welcome in God's heart as well. Sometimes people will say, why do so few disabled people go to church? Well, why do so few disabled people go to church? Why do you see so few disabled people in church communities? Perhaps it's because they don't feel that they're welcome. Perhaps it's because they don't feel as if they belong. Or they feel as if when they come to our churches, they're going to be the objects of our prayers and they're going to be treated as less than equal to us. It strikes me that the question of inclusion and disability is one of mission and one of empowerment. And that leads me to something else. I think it's really important for us to work out ways as local churches of how we make mission and ministry accessible to disabled people as well. They don't simply become part of our church community to receive, they give. They too can pray, they too can preach, they too can share, they too can give, they too can be on platforms, they too can lead. I think it's a real sadness that we end up in a situation where disabled people are treated as folk who come and receive something but are never able to give something. A few years ago, in an event that I was involved in called Spring Harvest, we were working with prospects on some awareness raising. And there was a little video shown of a young woman who was living with Down syndrome. And she was sitting on her sofa, sharing the story of why she loved Jesus and how much her life had been transformed by a prospects group. I have to tell you that that week there were many videos shown. There were videos shown that showed well-known Christian celebrities speaking with clever gizmos and lots of ideas and lights and sound and all the special effects that would make a blockbuster movie. But the one video that was the most powerful thing across the whole week was the video of that woman as she shared how the gospel had entered her life and changed her heart. It was the most powerful thing across a week. And I wonder sometimes whether we are excluding ourselves from encountering God's grace, or we are denuding our churches from the possibility of engagement with and transformation by disabled people by assuming that they are not able to minister as well. Lastly, I think I want to reflect a little bit on whether or not there is the possibility for a Christian model of engagement and reflection around disability, rather than the simple two medical or social models that we have at the moment. With the medical model, we're treating the condition. With the social model, we are seeking to highlight the areas where that person is disabled. But I wonder if there's a third model, a Christian model for disability, in which we start from the premise of equality. We start from this conviction that people who are disabled are still equal to us, grounded deeply in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. And that instead of it being a rights-driven model, it is a responsibilities-driven model as well. I know this is controversial, and living with disability in my own family and in my own life, I can understand the clamour for rights. But I wonder sometimes if those believers, those men and women and young people and children who are Christians already and are disabled, end up focusing too much on their rights and not enough on their responsibilities. What does it mean for the disabled community to be empowered and use the responsibility of their own lives to minister into the lives of others? How do we move away from a rights or a legally based model of disability to a relationally based model of disability? Strikes me as a very important and a deeply prophetic question that could model something to society. In 21st century Britain, we are renegotiating what it means to have a welfare system. We're moving from a welfare state to a welfare system where there are 1,000 little ships that can provide services on personalised budgets and supporting people as they live through disability. It strikes me that local churches should be part of that flotilla. We should be engaging with, talking with and shaping services, general services and religious services for the disabled community to help them to live out their responsibilities and to be empowered. And that's the third area for me, empowerment. What does an empowered church look like when it is working with people who live with disability? How do we empower our churches? How do we empower disabled people? It's not just about avoiding wheelchair pens and having ramps and doors with bright lights and that open and close at the right moment and toilets that people can get to, as important as they are. It's about discipleship models. It's about preaching and teaching. It's about pastoral ministry, prayer, listening, leadership development. How do we, in a Christian model, empower those who have been disempowered? And the fourth aspect of a Christian model for disability for me, I think, is identity. Moving away from an identity which is primarily defined by the disability and into an identity that is primarily defined by your personhood in Christ. It strikes me, you see, that we are all disabled. I am marred by sin. I am broken. I am constrained and constricted by the challenges that I struggle with every day. And if we live with a model of disability that talks about the disabled and the non-disabled, I think we're missing something of the point. We are all disabled. We are all marred and broken. And we need to work out a way of recognizing that and helping people see a clear biblical identity in Christ rather than in their disability or how they are defined by society. There are two stories that I want to reflect on as I finish what I have to share with you today. The first is a story from the Old Testament about a young boy called Mephibosheth. It's told in 2 Samuel chapter 9. Mephibosheth was the grandson of Saul. King David, after Saul's death, says, "Is there anybody that I can show mercy to?" And we're told that he is told by one of his generals that there's only one person, that's Mephibosheth, but he is just a cripple. So David calls for Mephibosheth to be brought to him from a place called Lodabar, which means the place of aloneness or the place of forgottenness. And as Mephibosheth stands before King David, he says to David, "My lord and my king, what would you want with a dead dog like me?" It's the most powerful thing because it gives you the impression that this young man has been made to feel like nothing but a dead dog by those around him. My brothers and sisters, how often do we make disabled people feel like that? How do we make them feel like a dead dog? And this young man, who is lame in both feet, is told by King David that he will eat at the king's table and live in the king's house. And his disability is hidden by his invitation to the table. He becomes a prince in the king's family. It strikes me that there are millions of disabled people who need the opportunity to become kings, princes and princesses in the palace of the king, to eat at the king's table. Perhaps one of the most segregated places in this country is what we would call the king's table, the breaking of bread table, the place where we eat bread and drink wine. How do we make sure that that is a table where all people who love Christ and want to serve him are invited to come and eat and drink as equals on the level ground that exists before the cross? You see, God himself, I would suggest to you, has been disabled. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, was disabled. He still has the scars in his hands and in his feet. He has been disfigured. Has God redeemed disability by drawing it into his character? And does he call us to recognize that disability is much more complex? How do we welcome people to the king's table? And the last story is very simple. It's from Luke chapter 14, one of my favorite passages when it comes to this issue. At the great banquet, the good and the powerful and the strong and the mighty are all invited to come. And they're too busy, or they're too wealthy, or they're too caught up with other things, so they don't come. So Jesus sends his disciples into the highways and the byways, and they bring the broken and the excluded and the poor and those who are unable to walk. They bring those who are classed as less than whole and less than equal in Jewish society. Why? So that, in the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 14, my house may be full. Here's my thought, and I think it's a beautiful one. A church which doesn't have disabled people in it is disabling itself. It's making itself poorer in terms of experience, poorer in terms of outlook, poorer in terms of fellowship, and poorer in terms of the wonderful, beautiful tapestry of diversity that God wants us to be. May we be inclusive people who reach out to those who have been disabled by others, but never disempowered by God. God bless you.
Hi, I'm Bev, and this is my daughter. Tell me your name. Maria. One of the big issues that we have with her is her knowing how to maintain boundaries around persons and also persons' boundaries within her. She sometimes likes to run up and grab and hug and touch people without their permission and can make them uncomfortable. But also when strangers approach her, it makes her nervous and she backs off. One of the most important ways that we can work with individuals with disabilities in our churches is by communication. Before you touch, ask if it's okay. Ask if it's okay to hold her hand or to hug her. If she takes your hand and it makes you uncomfortable, let me know or let her know. Don't push, don't back away, but just gently remove your hand and say that you're just not comfortable. If we know how you react, we can help her learn boundaries better as well. She learns by people talking to her, She enjoys communication. She enjoys being a part of a group. Most individuals do.
My name is Chad, and I have obsessive-compulsive disorder. It doesn't matter whether the person has a sensory issue or not, but it's always important to ask them if it's okay to hug them. A person may have a boundary issue. A person may have a sensory issue. You always need to be respectful of the individual first before you go in for a hug.
Hello, my name is AJ. I have an autism spectrum disorder. Makes me feel uncomfortable, makes me feel all kinds of things that I don't know how to put into words. I would say I don't want to take hugs right now, because I would just say I'm not in a mood. I would think that if they would ask, I'd feel much better about myself to feel more comfortable hugging that person. There's nothing wrong with giving hugs to other people. It's just a normal thing, but not for me.
Things that brought me here. You know the story of every tear, 'cause you've been here from the very start. And even though I don't know what your plan is, I know you make beauty from these ashes. I've seen joy, I've seen pain, and on my knees I call your name.
I'm Barb Cox Baird, and I was diagnosed with a disease called multiple sclerosis. And that disease has allowed me to see so many things, but I don't like to be seen as only a person that walks with a walker. I like to be seen as an intellect and as somebody who can smile and laugh, and that is something that we don't do as society. We look at the walker, we look at the wheelchair, and we forget that that person needs to be known as who they are. The term disabilities incorporates so many people, so I think it really is specific about what disability that you speak of. If a person has a visual issue or a hearing issue, or a child that has behavior issues, or somebody who walks with a walker or a wheelchair, everything is different. All disabilities are different. And I think that the point is to become accustomed to and welcoming to all persons. I like to be approached as just a person who does not have a disability outwardly. People are afraid of persons that have disabilities because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to say it. They don't know how to empathize. They don't know how to love a person that has a problem they can't define. And I think that there's so much to be said by and for the people that are disabled. They're just wanting so badly to be heard and to be loved and to be included. as people with disabilities in a church, they don't feel invited. As a community of Christians, we need to place them in every role possible, volunteering, paid positions, and I'll tell you, I judge a facility or a venue and their accessibility based on how many people that are employed that have disabilities. Do you know how many that there are in your church or in your community? I would think very few. I hate when people see me as a person that walks with a walker because all they see is the walker. They don't look in my face. They don't see me as anyone worthy of any conversation, of anything. I dream of a time when I don't have to use my walker so that I can feel secure in my own self. It's so important for me to ask people to look past the walker and see me. I am an intellect. I have a degree. I went to college, but I don't have anybody that talks to me that way. Nobody talks to me about the things I know. They only talk to me about the walker, or they talk to me about being disabled. And that's a really hard thing to do. I dream of a day when I'm not seen as a person with disabilities, but as a precious child of God.
You with the sad eyes, don't be discouraged. Oh, I realize it's hard to take courage in a world full of people. You can lose sight of it all in darkness. Still inside you make you feel so small. But I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. So don't be afraid to let them show your true colors. True colors are beautiful like a rainbow. Show me a smile then. Don't be unhappy. Can't remember when I last saw you laughing. If this world makes you crazy and you've taken all you can bear, you call me up because you know I'll be there. And I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. So don't be afraid to let them show your true colors. True colors are beautiful like a rainbow. I can't remember when I last saw you laughing. If this world makes you crazy